So I haven't seen a whole lot of installs done on these cars for this job, but what we're going to be doing today is, if I get the hood open, we're going to be installing a radiator and a transmission cooler for my 2012 Forester XT. Now, bear in mind the reason why I have to throw on a transmission cooler is because this car is only available in automatic, and you have to have an external cooler because the aftermarket radiator that I got does not have one of those. I've kind of got it mocked up to where I can fit my transmission cooler behind my horns here, and it'll tuck right back in behind there in front of my condenser. And then we'll run a line. I'm gonna get under the car real quick. So we're on the driver's side of the car. These two lines here are your transmission fluid lines, which run down the bottom of the stock radiator. And this one over here towards the passenger side is going to be the return line going back to your transmission, and this is the entry line going into the radiator. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to be taking these two hoses here and then rerouting them to the front of the car where the cooler is, so that way we can have the same effect. So obviously the first step with this is you want to take off the radiator cap, or, well, I guess this isn't technically the radiator cap, but it's the upper coolant reservoir that's connected to the radiator. So we got the coolant draining now. I'm gonna let that do its thing here. And then next thing we're gonna do is we're going to detach the upper radiator hose and the lower radiator hose, and then get all that stuff disconnected. I'll kind of show you where to go from there. And we're gonna get the hoses off, pull the radiator up, and then get started on rerouting the transmission cooler lines. Okay, so I got the first transmission line off, but one thing I forgot to do was I forgot to mark which one of these is the return line. So I just put a piece of tape on there so I know which one's which. Okay, so you can see right there the transmission lines are disconnected. I'm going to leave those on the radiator because I'm going to have to pull them off anyway. We got the lower hose disconnected down there, and then we still have to get to the upper radiator hose that's going to the engine. But that clip it's inside has kind of been a pain in the ass spot, so I'll have to deal with that. But all it's left to do now is you just got to pull off these two support brackets, or bolts of these support brackets, and the radiator should just lift up and out of the car. That's after, oh, and also pull the fans off too, so, because you're going to need to do that. And next thing we'll do here is we're going to mock up a spot for the transmission cooler and kind of measure what we're going to need for hose. So again, if you're on the, I'm looking at the driver's side of the car down here, this one on the right is your return line going to your transmission, and then this one is your entry line on the left. So make sure you mark those. Okay, so I'm first going to kind of show you what I got with the kit here. So this is going to be your transmission cooler. It's going to mount in the car in front of the AC condenser like this. So the bottom line is going to be your entry line, and since heat rises, you want to go have your return line be up at the top here. So it's going to look like that. So the way that you mount it in is there are these little rubber, or I guess foam stoppers here that you put in between your condenser and the transmission cooler. And these little, what do you call them? They're not zip ties, but they're something equivalent to it. But you'll just run those through the cooler into the and out through the condenser, and then these will go on the other side, and you just pull them tight and secure them behind the condenser. And then, but you make sure you put this foam stopper in between the condenser and the transmission cooler. So we're gonna figure out, and I got some extra length of hose too, so this isn't the only, because this is only like 4 feet of hose, so you are gonna need more if you're doing this job. And also, I'm not really sure what this is. I don't think I'll need this, but if you have a car that this applies to, maybe just hang on to that, but I don't think I'll need it for my Forester. Okay, so we got the cooler mounted up here. It's gonna be a little bit of a tight fit down by that AC fitting. That should not be a big deal. But what we're going to do now, and as you can, well, actually, as you can see, so this just goes out. These ties just go out through the back of the condenser, and they're pretty much just fancy zip ties. But just cut those to length before you put the radiator in. But what we're going to do now is we're going to run our hose or we'll figure out what kind of length of hose we need. So this top one again is going to go to the right line there, and then the bottom one is going to go to the one on the left. So I'll let you know when that's done. But now the next step is to pull the thermostat housing off, and looks like you got 2 bolts there that are holding that in place, so 2 8mm bolts. So we're going to pull that off, put in the new thermostat, and I'll show you when we get there. Okay, we got the housing off now, so there's the factory thermostat. Here is here's the new one I got. This is the Mishimoto one. Doesn't look too different than the factory one, honestly, but you know what? Figure I might as well just throw in compatible parts. But all you gotta do is just pull that out, drop this one in the same way that this one came out, and then reinstall the housing with the 2 bolts. And then we'll pick up on the next step. Okay, so the thermostat's back in. So thinking of like the easiest order of events here. So you can do this one of 2 ways. You could either throw the hoses back on for the upper and lower radiator hoses, or you can drop the radiator in first and then try to finagle the hoses that way. Now, I would recommend probably putting the hoses in first and then dropping the radiator in. So, because that's gonna give you the most space to work with. And then it would just be a matter of throwing your fans in, and then obviously we got to cut these to size so they're not digging into the radiator. And then the last thing is to cut the length of hose for the transmission cooler, refill all the fluids, and then we have to burp the system. So that way we don't want to have any air bubbles in the coolant. And obviously you'll have to top off some transmission fluid because a little bit leaked out. I got a whole collection of coolant and transmission fluid down there. But yeah, so we're probably at least past the halfway point here. So here's the new radiator. So what we're going to do next, before we put it in the car, we're going to attach the fan shrouds. So there's already screw holes there for the shrouds. And then there is a attachment that comes with the radiator. There is an attachment right here that screws into that, because you're going to need that to run this coolant line that's at the upper reservoir, because that goes into the radiator. So you're going to need to screw this on first before you install that. That's important. So we're going to get this put together, and we'll be back for the next step. I have my lovely assistant here. So this is what it looked like, or should look like when it's done. This is the back side, obviously. And just make sure that these little pegs right here on the bottom, right there, here we go, mount into those holes, because those are the lower radiator supports. And then you're gonna need to throw on the upper ones after that, obviously. And then this is the coolant line that goes to your overflow reservoir right here. I'm gonna put that in last, just because I'm honestly not sure. I can't quite remember what way that goes in. Okay, so we're under the car now. I got the lower radiator hose installed. Just something to point out, if you are doing this mod and you're installing the radiator as well as the hoses, with the radiator being bigger, it makes it so the lower radiator hose kinks. So I had to trim this down a little bit, so you can see kind of did a shitty job there, but now it looks like it's a solid piece of pipe that's not kinked. Looks all good. But just something to bear in mind whenever you're doing this, or if you're doing this, make sure that you trim this down. I had to cut it down probably about maybe half an inch to an inch, something like that. I don't remember for sure, but it's all good now. Okay, so the trans cooler's in, and I'm actually going to get under the car here. There we go. So again, this right here is the return line, this piece, and you want to make sure that you have at least like a 3-inch bend in these things. So you don't want this to be totally kinked. But I've got this kind of dressed with zip ties here so they at least stay together. They're not just kind of flopping around like that. So that's, I'll actually pull that a little bit tighter. There you go. And then this here is the entry line going to the cooler. And then again, as the heat rises, it'll go through the cooler and then back into the return line to the transmission. And I'm not really bumping up against anything metal, but if you do, you want to make sure that you cut a length of hose and wrap it around that part that's going to be bumping up against the metal, just in case, you know, it like severs it or cuts it, and you don't want fluid leaking everywhere. But I think for the most part everything's all buttoned up and good to go. So now we just got to put fluid in and hope for the best. 2.5 gallons of coolant. So you just kind of let this go, do its thing. That's gonna just keep filling up as it catches air bubbles and whatnot. So.
Bubbles.
Bubbles. Okay, so I think we got the coolant system about burped. It's been a couple minutes now since it's been in the bubbles. So we're gonna go into this guy here, plug that up, and that way we can pull this off and put the radiator cap back on. And then what we're gonna want to do is you want to run the car with the heat on as long as you can until the thermostat kicks on, so you can fill up the heater core. Then once that's done, there should be some room left in your reservoir to top it off with coolant. And then all we have to do then is just fill up the little bit of transmission fluid that we lost, and that'll be it. So we got the car running now. I'm not seeing any leaks, so that's a good sign. But we'll go in here. Since this car doesn't have a temperature gauge, you want to wait until the little blue light there goes off, because at that point you'll know your car is at the average running temperature, and your thermostat should open after that and refill the heater core with coolant. Everything seems to be all working. Didn't really lose a whole lot of transmission fluid, so I might top it off just a tiny bit just to be safe, but I ran it through the gears. Everything looks good. I got no leaks on the cooler here, and nothing coming down from the other fittings. Okay, so I wanted to make a quick amendment to this after I've had an opportunity to drive the car. So a couple things to keep in mind if you're doing this job. I would not go with the Mishimoto thermostat, because after I had installed that and got everything, you know, buttoned up and put back together, probably within the first hour of me driving it, it threw a code saying that the thermostat was stuck open. So putting in the OEM thermostat, you know, got rid of that. So would not recommend getting the Mishimoto one. Just stick to OEM. It just works better. But lesson learned there, I suppose. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out is, so this is actually a replacement radiator that I got from Mishimoto, so they were cool enough to honor the warranty on this. But the problem that I had is when I noticed that I had forgotten to wrap Teflon tape around this fitting here, I went to go back it out after the engine had cooled down, but in the process of backing it out, it stripped the threads on this, and it was stuck on the radiator. So both the male and female threads were stripped, and the radiator was basically toast at that point, so it couldn't be used. But like I said, I brought it to the attention of Mishimoto. They were cool enough to honor the warranty on that, so they got me a new unit, which is really cool of them, so I appreciate that. But just a couple things to watch out for. And because, yeah, these threads are they seem like they're made of very, very soft aluminum, so you got to be really careful when backing those out or driving them in, one of the two. But aside from that, I've had it, you know, I've taken on a couple long test drives and haven't had any problems since. But Hope this helps somebody. Thanks for watching.